All right, ready to boost your English listening skills? We dug into that English Learner's Corner podcast you sent, plus your notes, and this deep dive is going to feel like having a personal language coach, just for you.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how they break it down. It's not just listen more, it's different types of listening, each with a specific purpose. Like a targeted workout, but for your ears.
Okay, I like that analogy. But first things first, why is listening so important? The podcast really hammered that home.
Well, think about it. How do we learn any language in the first place? Babies, right? They're absorbing sounds, rhythm, meaning all before they can even talk. So for anyone learning English, listening is the foundation. Speaking, vocabulary, even understanding those cultural nuances, it all builds from there.
So it's more than just recognizing words, it's like absorbing the whole vibe of the language.
Exactly. And the podcast really pushes this idea of active listening. It's not enough to have English on in the background. You got to engage.
Okay, so what does that look like, practically speaking? Do I need to be sitting up straight with a notepad every time I watch a show?
Not necessarily. It can be as structured as taking notes or just mentally summarizing what you just heard. Even asking yourself questions as you listen, like what did that idiom mean or why they emphasize that word. Keeps your brain working, keeps those language gears turning.
Got it. Turn passive listening into a mental workout. So let's talk types. The podcast mentioned extensive, intensive, and interactive. Where do we even start?
Let's start with extensive listening. This is your long-distance run, just immersing yourself in the soundscape of English. Podcasts, audiobooks, TV shows, the key is consistency over time.
Wait, so binging my favorite sitcom counts as language learning? I'm in. But seriously, what's the benefit besides getting used to hearing English?
It goes deeper than that. It's your brain subconsciously picking up on patterns, pronunciation, natural rhythm, how words connect. Like learning the music of the language, not just the individual notes.
Okay, I'm sold on extensive listening. What about intensive? Sounds, well, intense.
It is, but in a good way. It's like a focused sprint. You pick short audio clips, maybe a news snippet, a song lyric, a short dialogue, and you dissect it. Every word, every grammatical structure, you're really digging in.
So this is where I build vocabulary, grammar muscles, all that.
You got it. It's like analyzing a painting, brushstroke by brushstroke. You're training your ear to catch those subtleties, expanding your language toolbox.
Got it. Intensive listening. It's about quality over quantity. So then where does interactive listening fit in?
Interactive listening, that's game day. You're applying everything you've learned to real-time conversations, language partners, online discussions, even just chatting with native speakers. Listening, understanding, and responding all in the moment.
Okay, that sounds a bit nerve-wracking, but also exciting. No substitute for real-world practice, right?
Exactly. It's where you test your comprehension, learn to adapt to different speaking styles, and build confidence in your own spoken English.
This is already making me rethink how I listen. Okay, let's talk accents. The podcast mentioned how English has so many flavors, and that can be a challenge.
It's true. Each accent, whether it's British, American, Australian, you name it, they all have their own rhythm, intonation, even ways of pronouncing certain sounds.
That makes sense, but how do I get past feeling lost when someone has a strong accent?
First step is just exposure, listening to lots of different accents. And the podcast highlighted this cool technique called shadowing.
Shadowing. Okay, I'm intrigued. What is that exactly?
Basically, you mimic. You listen to a phrase spoken in a certain accent and try to repeat it as closely as possible, matching the intonation, the rhythm, even the way sounds are connected. You're like their vocal shadow.
So it's not just passive listening, I'm actively training my mouth to make those sounds.
You got it. And the cool thing is, as you practice shadowing, you start to internalize those accent nuances. Makes it easier to understand different speakers later on.
That's a game changer. Definitely trying shadowing. Now we got to talk on technology, right? Podcasts, apps, YouTube, there's a whole digital world for this. Where do we even begin? The podcast had so many suggestions.
It can be overwhelming, for sure. But instead of just jumping in, let's think about how to choose the right tools and use them effectively.
So it's not about using everything, it's about using the right things the right way. I need some direction here.
Think of it like setting fitness goals. Instead of just wandering around the gym, you have a plan. Do you want to build strength, improve cardio, work on flexibility? Same with language learning. What are your specific listening goals?
I guess my main goal is to understand native speakers more easily, no matter their accent. But I also want to build my vocabulary and feel more confident speaking.
Those are great goals. And they'll inform your tech choices. So for example, if understanding fast speech is tough, you might start with podcasts designed for learners. where the pace is slower.
Okay, so it's like starting with lighter weights before I move on to the heavier ones.
Exactly. And remember the different types of listening. You can use tech for all of them. For extensive listening, maybe try an audiobook on a topic you enjoy. For intensive listening, there are apps that break down news clips or dialogues. And for interactive, you can find apps that connect you with language partners for live practice.
It's like having a personal language gym right on my phone, but I gotta be honest, one of my biggest struggles is real-world situations. Fast speech, new words, background noise. It's so discouraging sometimes.
I get it, those challenges can be super frustrating. But the good news is, the podcast had some great strategies, and we'll dive into those right after.
Wait, we're stopping there, come on.
Gotta keep you on the edge of your seat. We'll unpack all those strategies and more in the next part of our deep dive.
Ugh, fine. But I'm already hooked. This is changing how I think about listening. Can't wait for more.
All right, so before we got cut off, we were talking about those real-world listening roadblocks, right? Fast speech, unfamiliar words, all that noise. It can be a lot.
Tell me about it. So what's the secret? How do we conquer these listening villains? I need strategies, not just listen more.
Well, the English Learner's Corner podcast had a ton of tips, and it's interesting how many connect back to those listening types we talked about. Remember extensive listening, your secret weapon for fast speech.
You mean instead of being overwhelmed by speed, I just need more exposure, more time listening?
Exactly. The more you hear native speakers at their natural pace, the more your brain gets used to it. Like training for a marathon, but for your ears. One podcast at a time.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about new words? I can't stop and look up everything I don't know.
That's where intensive listening comes in, and using context clues. Instead of grabbing the dictionary every 2 seconds, try to guess the meaning from the other words around it. The situation.
So it's like I'm a detective using the clues to figure out the mystery word.
I like that. And you can even keep a vocabulary journal. Jot down new words, what you think they mean. Later, you can check with a dictionary or app. It's a more active way to learn, and those words will stick better.
Ooh, good tip. Now, what about background noise? I have trouble focusing when there's a lot going on.
That's super common. But you can train your brain to filter distractions. Remember how we talked about active listening? Those techniques are key here. Try mentally repeating what you hear, even just a phrase at a time. Solidifies the info, keeps your focus sharp.
So it's like I'm giving my brain a workout, even when it wants to get distracted.
Exactly. And hey, practical stuff helps too. Noise-canceling headphones, those are your friends. The podcast even suggested practicing in different environments, build up your tolerance. Maybe a quiet cafe first, then a busier one, eventually even a park.
Exposure therapy for my ears. Speaking of exposure, let's get back to that digital toolbox. I'm still kind of overwhelmed by all the choices, podcasts, YouTube apps, help.
It's a lot, right? Remember, choose the right tools for you and use them strategically. Let's break it down. Starting with podcasts, English Learner's Corner, specifically recommended ESL Pod, The English We Speak, and All Ears English. Those are good places to start.
Oh yeah, I've heard of those. What makes them better than the zillion other podcasts out there?
These are made for language learners. Clear, slower speech, explanations of vocab and grammar. They even often have transcripts so you can read along. It's like having a teacher built into each episode.
That sounds perfect, especially while I'm still building confidence. Now what about YouTube? It's an endless rabbit hole, but how do I find stuff that's actually good for learning?
The podcast had some good suggestions there too. English Addict with Mr. Duncan, that's great for British English. BBC Learning English has a bunch of stuff, from news to grammar. And Rachel's English, that's all about American pronunciation.
Nice, a good mix of accents. With YouTube, it's so easy to just, end up watching funny cat videos.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But even those can be useful, right? Pay attention to the language in the comments, or trying to describe what's happening in the video using English. Find those little chances to engage.
I love that. Turning my guilty pleasures into learning opportunities. Okay, I'm seeing how all these digital tools can fit together. What about apps? Those language learning apps. Are they worth it?
Apps like Duolingo, Babbel, Rosetta Stone, those can be really helpful for structured learning. Interactive exercises, feedback. They often have speech recognition, so you can practice your pronunciation too, like a virtual tutor.
So they're good for intensive listening, building those core skills, grammar, and all that.
Exactly. But don't make apps your only thing, okay? balance them with authentic stuff, like podcasts and YouTube.
It's about variety, like any good workout routine. Now, I've always loved audiobooks, but I never thought of them as a language learning tool. Am I missing out?
No way. Audiobooks are fantastic for immersing yourself in English for long stretches. You've got Audible, LibriVox, even YouTube has them. Pick something you enjoy, maybe a familiar story to start, and just soak it in.
I like that. Sneaking in some learning while enjoying a good story. And if I get lost, I can always rewind or even get the text version and read along.
Right. And don't forget about online courses. Platforms like Coursera, EDX, Udemy, they have courses specifically for English listening skills. A bit more structured, but you can go at your own pace.
So many options. I'm feeling less overwhelmed and more excited to check it all out. But with all this tech, it's easy to fall into passive listening, right? How do we make sure we're actively engaged?
Super important point. Remember those active listening techniques. Taking notes, summarizing, asking yourself questions, even shadowing those are key to really getting the most out of your digital learning.
So I need a mental checklist to make sure I'm not just zoning out while I'm listening or watching. Engage, process, analyze, got it.
Yep. And don't be afraid to challenge yourself. As you get more comfortable, try stuff that's a little outside your comfort zone. Maybe a podcast on a topic you're interested in, even if it's not made for learners. Or a TV show with more complex dialogue.
So instead of staying in the language learning lane, I should branch out into the real world of English content.
Exactly. It'll feel tough at first, but it's how you really push your skills to the next level. And be patient, okay? This is a journey, not a race.
That's good to hear, because it's easy to get discouraged, when you don't understand everything perfectly right away. But it's progress, not perfection.
You got it. Celebrate those small wins. The time you understand a new idiom, you have a conversation with a native speaker, even just following a podcast without getting totally lost. It all adds up.
I love that. Recognizing the wins and staying motivated. Now, before we wrap up this part, there's one more thing. Idioms and slang. They're like the secret code of English, and I always get tripped up.
Idioms and slang. They can be tricky, but they're also what makes English so fun and expressive. The good news is, English Learner's Corner had some great advice for cracking that code, and we'll dive into that after.
Oh, come on, not another cliffhanger.
Got to keep you coming back for more. We'll uncover those idiom mysteries and wrap everything up in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Okay, we're back. And wow, this deep dive has been a workout. For my ears, at least.
Yeah, we've covered a lot. Different types of listening, using tech, all those idioms and slang. But before we wrap up completely, I think it's important to zoom out a bit, see the bigger picture.
Okay, I'm all for big picture thinking. What you got?
Well, going through this English Learner's Corner podcast, it really hit me. They focus on how important listening is for English learners, right?
Yeah.
But these skills, they go way beyond just language. They're like life skills in disguise.
Ooh, okay, now I'm intrigued. I mean, yeah, active listening is important in any conversation, not just English. But what about the other types? How do those fit in?
Well, take intensive listening. That focused attention to detail, right? Isn't that useful everywhere? Whether it's solving a tough problem at work, trying to understand a new concept, even appreciating a piece of music, that ability to really tune in and break things down, it's super valuable.
You're right, I never thought about it that way. And interactive listening. It's more than just understanding the words, it's how you respond, how you read between the lines, pick up on those unspoken cues.
Exactly. Those are the skills that help you build relationships, understand people better, even empathize with them. It's a core of good communication, and that's important in every part of life.
Wow. So it's like learning English isn't just about the language itself, it's developing a whole toolkit of skills that help you in, well, everything.
That's exactly it. And that's what makes this deep dive so cool. You're not just investing in your English, you're investing in yourself. These skills, they'll help you in so many situations, no matter what language is being spoken.
That's actually a really empowering thought. I'm definitely feeling a renewed sense of purpose in my learning now.
That's great to hear. And remember, listening, it's a lifelong skill. It's a journey. The more you practice, the more you'll unlock, not just the beauty of English, but a deeper understanding of the world around you.
This has been eye-opening, for sure. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on listening. Thanks for being such a great guide.
My pleasure. Now go out there and listen to the world. With intention, with curiosity, and with the confidence that you have what it takes to understand not just the words, but what's beneath them. Happy listening.